So now we have reduced the number of plants in your native plant garden, which is near your front door. And we've taken out all the invaders, and we've taken out all the dandelions and the grass that's seeded in and put chips. And we took out some of the bigger chunks of dead wood and dead leaves and at least brushed it to the ground or got rid of it and put it in your compost pile. Now we're going to see what we can get done to make your landscape look better with pruning. And I have taught pruning for many years, and I do so using the 3-habit system. I consider plants as having one of 3 habits: cane growers, mounding habit plants, or trees and tree-like shrubs. And they also each one have a pruning budget on how much you can prune before you get into trouble. But let's start with the pruning cuts. There are only 3 basic kinds of cuts. There's the heading cut, which takes off the tip of a branch. And this is pretty much a bad idea for most controlling size because you usually get an upsurge of shoots that we call water sprouts. Water sprouts. They are rapid growing, skinny, ugly, and impossible to get rid of. So avoid making the heading cut. This is not a good cut for most pruning. The second picture down is a picture of the reduction cut, which is a good cut to use on shrubs, not so much on trees. This is the correct way to shorten a branch. You find the part that sticks out the longest. It's shown in black here. You follow it back to a side branch, which is big enough, and cut it off there. And then on the very right, the new growth, your shrub is briefly shorter, or your branch is shorter. The new growth gets forced through existing branches, but it looks pretty. You don't get water sprouts. And in fact, if you're pruning the right way and the right amount, you will never get those straight up skinny shoots called water sprouts or suckers. They are pretty much a reflection of too much or the wrong kind of pruning. And if you want to find out more, you can always go on YouTube and check out the rehabilitative pruning slideshow if you have some water sprouts. And finally, the lowest cut is called the removal cut. It used to be called the thinning cut. Now it's called the removal cut because it removes a branch where it began as a bud. And this never made anything shorter. This would be like taking off the lower limbs of your Doug fir or your plant to get it up off the shrub that's beneath it. Or it would be like thinning out a plant from top to bottom so that you can kind of see through it and it's a little more open and airy and delicate. So you want to stick to reduction and removal cuts when you're pruning. Let's see what we got. This is a cane grower shrub. These are shrubs that renew themselves with branches that we call canes that arise directly from the ground. And examples in the native plant category would be red twig dogwoods or Oregon grape. And if you want to restrict the size, you would cut out some of the biggest, oldest canes, making, I guess you would call it a thinning cut. I'm going to call it a removal cut, cutting it right to the ground or maybe 2 inches above the ground. And if you take out a few of the biggest, oldest ones every year, you have reduced the size. But besides that, you have thinned it out so that your shrub is a little less bulky. And here's the shotgun method on a Nandina, which is not a native plant, but it is a cane grower. And if it gets too tall and too leggy, you can cut some of the canes to the ground, and you can make some ugly-looking non-selective heading cuts to something that looks like a knuckle halfway down the plant. It looks just like a horrible cut, like I told you not to do, except it's okay on a Nandina or an Oregon grape because we want to create some sprouts there. So you can take a shrub that looks like on the left and turn it one that has foliage all the way to the bottom by cutting some of the canes to the ground and whacking some of them off inside. The main thing is you don't want to cut it into a ball or a cube. So here's an Oregon grape that gets up over this lady's window, and she can't see out, and she wants me to do something, and I say, okay, because it's a cane grower. I cut some of the canes to the ground, I whack some of them off down inside the shrub, and I even head back what's left to bring it down to its mature size, which is sort of 4 to 5 feet. If left unpruned, it could get 6 to 10 feet, but I can kind of keep it in the 4 to 5 foot range with pruning because it's a cane grower. And sometimes you can cut a cane grower right to the ground and regrow it. Take for example, if you had an Oregon grape that somebody had sheared into the shape of a freezer, and now you can't get out the gate or see out the window, you could slowly renovate it by cutting a third of the canes down to the ground for 3 years in a row. But maybe you just want to take a chainsaw and cut the whole thing to the ground and start it over. It's okay because it's a cane grower. This is called radical renovation, and it's okay for some plants, mainly plants in the cane grower category. I think the Plant Amnesty website has a valuable native plant list, and it tells you what habit they are in and also how you can prune them. I'll have to check into that. You can always write. We'll print it out and send it to you. Red twig dogwood's definitely a cane grower, and if left to its own, it'll get to be 10 feet tall and arched, and it will have pretty red tips on it in the winter. If you have a giant red twig dogwood and you like to keep it shorter, you can cut your red twig dogwood to the ground every year. Isn't that amazing? And let it regrow. You would do that in the spring. It would grow up to about 3 to 5 feet that summer, and then in the winter it would drop its leaves and you could look at the red twigs all winter. Isn't that interesting? Red twig dogwood. It's tough as nails. You can do a rad renovation on it every year. Just something to know. And here we have mounding habit shrubs. These would be things like snowberries and I guess your red huckleberry. You could prune to tidy up by finding the parts that stick out the most and bug you and hiding those cuts down inside the plant. It's called the grab and snip technique, and you always look for the worst first. This way you can take a mounding habit shrub that is, say, 3 to 4 feet and turn it into 2 to 3 feet. But mainly we get it so that it doesn't stick into the shrub next to it. Yeah, red huckleberry, that's a good example. So would be the snowberry and some of the other plants. Mounding habit shrubs are characterized by having smaller leaves and or softer wood, and they're basically blob-shaped. They don't have great architecture like the trees and the tree-like shrubs. Trees and tree-like shrubs have a much smaller pruning budget. With your mounding habit and your cane grower shrubs, you can take off, about a third of the foliage, and you can reduce them about a quarter of the size before you get into trouble. And what do I mean by trouble? Well, you basically run out of green things to cut to, and or you might stimulate the water sprout rebound effect. Trees and tree-like shrubs, you have to really ease up on. You don't want to make anything smaller. You want to use thinning cuts to make it daintier looking, to get it off of the wall or off of the shrub next to it. And a lot of times we take off some of the lower limbs that are crowding something below to give us that sort of feeling of definition between the layers in your garden. So these are the cuts you make on your trees and your tree-like shrubs. And examples would be, a silk tassel shrub. Your vine maple is definitely a tree. Any of the real trees, amelanchier and such. I guess I would prune a hazelnut like a tree-like, and I would go very easy because I didn't want to stimulate water sprouts. So these are the kinds of cuts. You would take off any branches that are actually touching the ground. For some reason, that always makes things look better. You're looking for Mr. Wrong Way. He's inside your shrub, and instead of going out to the daylight, he goes back through the center. We're working from the bottom up on this illustration. Back through the center and out the other way. And you'll notice on the right-hand side there are 2 parallel branches. This is kind of the artistic part of pruning, and it's just the one that takes all the skill and the artistic eye. But the main thing is don't exceed your budget. If you have 2 parallel branches that are doing the same work, it sometimes looks better to take off one, usually the lower one. Or if there are 3 parallel branches, it looks better to take out the center one. For some reason, dogwoods comes to mind. And then up above those parallel branches, you'll see that there's 2 branches. One goes too far up and one goes too far down into the layer above or below it. And you can make your tree-like shrub or tree look better if you eliminate some of those that wander too far out of their area. On the left-hand side, you'll see a crossing rubbing branch, and it sometimes looks better to take those out. You have to be careful that you don't go overboard with the rules. A lot of times, if you take out all the crossing rubbing branches, you are over-pruned and you're doing more damage than the crossing rubbing branches were doing. So just know that it's an aesthetic thing, and you cannot exceed the pruning budget. You want to keep your cut small-ish and know when to quit. Don't we all wish we knew when to quit? You'll notice up on top that there is a potential cut to shorten. That only works with the tree-like shrubs, not so much with the actual trees. And notice that if you cut that top out, it would really only be about 10% shorter. So whenever possible, we let our trees and our tree-like shrubs grow to be as tall and as wide as they want to be. Trying to prune for size control is really the way to messing up your plant. So do avoid it whenever you can. Here's a tree-like shrub. This is a silk tassel. Isn't that lovely? It hangs with these dingle-dangles on it. And you can thin it out to make it look even more attractive. And then you have your western hazelnut. They can be a bit of a nuisance in gardens because they show up where you want, but now you know the Roundup trick, so you don't have to put up with it. But they do have wonderful architectural quality, sort of like a witch hazel. They can have beautiful branches. Just be sure not to over prune them and create water sprouts or suckers. So a gentle thinning can make it look more lovely and enhance that nice lookingness. So what kinds of pruning do we do when we're trying to clean up our native plant garden that's by the front of the house as opposed to the one in the back of the woods? Well, you want to clear the walkways and get things off of the building so people can walk along without being molested by the shrubbery. And also, it's not a good idea to have things growing into your buildings and on your roof. So a little thinning can help that. Taking out dead wood. People don't understand the huge difference that taking out dead wood makes. If you just go inside and tap on dead brown twigs and they just fall out, and by tap, I mean using your hand pruner, or sometimes you can break them just by bending branches. Snap, 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 snap. Will make a huge difference on how things look. 90% of every cut I've ever made on a plant is a deadwood cut, and I try not to let my crew know about deadwooding because once they see deadwooding and they do deadwooding, that's all they want to do. They don't want to take out sod anymore. They want a deadwood. So I leave that as a treat. A lot of times you have plants that are just crowded too far into each other, and pruning with the grab and snip or crown raising can help separate them from each other. I also like to make different layers, top, middle, and lower. Occasionally, if you have a star attraction like a silk tassel tree, you can just thin it out so that it's a more glamorous plant. And occasionally, especially if something has been malpruned, you can cut it to the ground and regrow it. So here's a picture of somebody who's having trouble getting by on the walkway, and using the grab and snip technique, we've turned that snowberry into a smaller snowberry, and now she can get by. Sometimes our plants are just too crowded, and a little grab and snip, thinning, and selective reduction can make them fit together better. I actually kind of like the middle one the best, but you can even go as far as the one on the right. And a lot of what I do is separate layers, and that's by taking off the lower limbs. This is a vine maple and some kind of a ground cover underneath it. And just take off those lower limbs using true removal cuts, and things are just going to start looking better ordered to you. And this would be a vine maple that's too close to the building, and using true removal cuts, you will take some of those branches out so that it fits the space better. And this is a before and after of weeping willow to show what thinning can do. This is the before picture of a willow. There's 3 arborists in it, 1, 2, 3, top to bottom. And this is what it looks like when it's thinned out. It looks clean, crisp, and clear. You'll notice that the guy on the lower left is thinning out what's left so that it will match the rest of the tree. And so if something's bothering you, you want to try thinning it to make it look better. And then let me put a plug in again for the lowest story. What bugs people most is when all their shrubs are in the 10 to 15 foot range, they feel overwhelmed. And it's okay to have some shrubs that are in the 10 to 15 foot range, but there needs to be at least 2/3 of the stuff needs to be shrubs that are lower than that. And that includes the very lowest story. And some of these plants could be considered successful, and some of them aren't. Vancouveria, very successful. Oxalis, also very successful. Bead ruby, ditto. So deer fern is choice and well-behaved. Bunchberry's choice and well-behaved. It's so well-behaved it might even die. Trillium and the fawn flower, which is an erythronium. I think of them as avalanche lilies. Don't forget your erythroniums. Very choice and lovely. Sword ferns, the workhorse of the lower story. Trillium. Be sure to have some trillium near your front door. And kind of depends, but you might want to add some self-seeders, columbines, fringecups, and lupin. If you have some, you'll have more, so you better be sure you like them. I like the fringecups. Even though this isn't a glamorous plant in and of itself, it adds something to the feel of a garden. It makes it look woodlandy. I don't know how else to say it. And it'll seed itself around. Columbines, ooh la la. I'm liking a columbine. Also charming. Comes and it goes. And so here's the final picture. Here you have your trees for structure. You've got your medium-sized shrubs. This is my yard. This is my woodland section. And that would be the red huckleberry. And then on the bottom is the lower story. That's Vancouveria, sword ferns, and an interloper called hellebore, which isn't really native, but it kind of looks like a native. So I hope this has helped you decide how to restore order to your beautiful woodland native plant garden that's real close to the front door. This would be the end. If you have any further questions or comments, you can always contact us at plantamnesty.org. Thanks.